네, 안녕하세요. 승승장구 이프로입니다. 이전 리플의 CEO인 브래드 갈링하우스가 이 폭스 비즈니스에 출연을 해서 리플의 향후 계획에 대한 얘기를 한 바 있는데요. 2025년이 리플에게는 돌파의 해를 맞이할 수 있다고 발언한 것인데, 해당 부분 뉴스 기사로만 접하셨을 것이고 요약된 부분은 많이들 접해보셨을 겁니다. 제가 이 폭스 비즈니스와의 인터뷰한 풀 영상을 번역해서 가져왔고요. 이 인터뷰를 요약까지 해보였는데요. 이제 의역과 오역이 없도록 최대한 열심히 만든 만큼 영상 제작하는데 꽤나 오랜 시간 걸렸습니다. 본격적으로 시청하시기 전 구독과 좋아요 한 번씩 눌러주시고요. 다른 건 몰라도 좋아요는 꼭 한번 부탁을 좀 드리겠습니다. 여러분들의 좋아요가 제게는 엄청난 힘이 됩니다. 그럼 영상 시청하시겠습니다.
They are all popping anywhere from 2.5% for Ethereum all the way to 5% for Bitcoin. And XRP up 3.5% here. The pop comes less than 24 hours after President Trump signed into law a bill terminating a rule which would have allowed the Internal Revenue Service to force certain crypto brokers to disclose tax information on their platform's transactions. The original rule would have gone into place starting in 2026. The crypto crowd no doubt enjoying today's pop, but you know what? If you rewind the clock here a bit, they have not recovered the losses endured since the president unveiled his tariff plan last Wednesday. Bitcoin still has about 2% to go here to break even. We've got XRP about 4.97% in the red and Ethereum down 18.33%. But is today sort of the reawakening of the march back to the highs crypto saw after the November presidential election, and perhaps a friendlier SEC that may be less litigious with the lawsuits here? Joining us now in a Fox Business exclusive, Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse. Ripple's XRP is the native token of the decentralized blockchain XRP ledger. Litigious.
For sure.
As recently as our conversation with Hester Peirce of the SEC, one of the commissioners, she said that the lawsuit against Ripple was still hovering. Where is it now? Because last night we started to hear that it may be disappearing.
So we have reached agreement with staff, and usually what happens is you reach agreement with staff makes recommendation to the commission, and then the commission votes. So anytime we make announcements about that, we are clear that we've reached agreement with staff. The commission hasn't yet voted, but what we've agreed is to dismiss and move on. We're actually getting the SEC we had put in escrow a potential fine of $125 million. We're actually taking most of that back, including the interest that had been earned along the way. And I think it's just evidence that the Gensler SEC was on the wrong side of the law. And thanks to the new leadership at the SEC and in the White House, I think we're seeing a much more constructive, much more pro-innovation. We want these industries to grow at home.
When you say most of the $125 million you had parked in that little fund in case of the worst case scenario, what's left? Can you give us some?
The SEC is going to end up with a $50 million. The U.S. government's going to get $50 million. We even talked about making that available in XRP. But look, at the end of the day, this is a major step forward. You know, I think if you kind of zoom out and look at this, the Trump administration is absolutely living up to their promises. Guy David Sachs leading the effort at the White House, Scott Bessent, and certainly now Paul Atkins getting confirmed, I think, yesterday.
Yes.
These are people who are focused on how do we make sure this is an industry that can thrive at home with sensible regulation, common sense. And that's not what we had for the last 4 years.
What would you hope to see as common sense regulation? Have you talked to David Sachs, and what have you said? Hey, David, this at least needs to be front and center.
The two things that have the most momentum in Capitol Hill are around a stablecoin legislation and then something we generally call a market structure bill. Stablecoin legislation, because we haven't yet had clarity about at what point are banks involved, not involved, what kind of licensing is appropriate. Ripple recently launched our stablecoin under a New York trust license through the New York Department of Financial Services, which we think is kind of the gold standard for how to be regulated in this market. But having federal legislation that is providing clarity for the big players like USDC, Circle, as well as Tether is super important. I think we're going to see that sooner rather than later.
You know, President Trump has made big strides that are very pro-crypto. It's got to be great for somebody like you. However, the price of, let's just say, Bitcoin, which reached a high after the election of something like $107,000, is nowhere near that now. I think we're around 86,000 and change, but it's been a market drop. When do you foresee this moving back up? Because we've seen all kinds of wild projections of something like $250,000 per Bitcoin by the end of this year to people who say this thing's going down.
Yeah. When I think about that, you know, your last guest, Larry Fink, talked about just taking the long-term view.
Right.
And I almost don't think about it in that kind of short-term time frame. I think about what are the macro trends playing out for the crypto industry, for the XRP ecosystem. XRP's been the best performing major crypto in the last 90 days. We think about it as what does that look like over the next 3 years? I'm very optimistic. I mean, Ripple just announced our largest acquisition, actually one of the largest acquisitions in the entire crypto industry to date. We announced it earlier this week on Tuesday, in the middle of tariff palooza. You know, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with the tariffs, but we're betting on where the world's going to be in 3 years, not what's going to happen in the next 6 months.
Would you have made that acquisition a year ago?
No, hard no. Look, the SEC in the United States and even other parts of the Biden administration, it was a coordinated attack across many different agencies. Mm-hmm. We're finding that more and more out now. You already highlighted it in your introduction. The IRS had hostile rules about crypto that really didn't make any sense. Banks weren't even allowed to reasonably custody crypto without having an equal offset to their balance sheet, which really makes no sense for a bank then to even partake in this industry. It's a real industry. People want, I mean, that administration wasn't listening to consumers. They weren't listening to the voter and what the voter wanted. We're now seeing a significant change across the board. And an acquisition like that would have made no sense a year ago, and it makes a lot of sense now.
네, 앞선 영상 잘 보셨을까요? 영상 보신 후에 여러분의 리플에 대한 의견, 그리고 앞으로 우리 XRP 코인의 방향성에 대한 의견 댓글로 자유롭게 남겨주시고요. 이제 영상 요약을 좀 해드리자면은 이 부분은 지난 코인 시장의 상승의 요인에 대한 것이었는데, 이제 IRS의 암호화폐 세무 규정 철회, 이 규정이 뭐냐면 플랫폼들에서 보유한 암호화폐를 특정 회계 방법을 지정하지 않는다면 이제 자동으로 이제 선입 선출 방식으로 처리가 되는데, 이제 먼저 산 코인을 먼저 판 것으로 간주하는 것이고, 이 방식 같은 경우엔 특히나 강세장에서 세금 부담을 크게 가중을 시킵니다. 당연하죠. 먼저 샀었던 코인의 가격이 낮았을 테니까요. 즉 전체 수익률이 아닌 처음 산 코인의 단가로 수익률을 계산, 이를 세금으로 계산한 것인데, 이에 대한 법안을 무효화한 것이고요. 그 다음에 가장 중요한 리플과 SEC의 소송 종결이 임박했다는 것. 이제 SEC와의 직원과의 합의가 도달했으며 현재 위원회에 투표가 대기 중이다. 그리고 리플의 벌금 1억 2,500만 달러 중 그것도 5천만 달러만 XRP로 납부될 예정이며, 리플의 입장에서는 그간의 암호화폐의 비친화적인 규제에서 벗어난 전환점이라고 평가가 됩니다. 그리고 이제 규제 환경의 변화, 트럼프의 행정부가 들어서면서 점점 암호화폐 산업의 우호적으로 기조가 바뀌고 있으며 데이비드 sak스 백악관 암호화폐 정책 책임자죠. 스콧 베산트 미 재무장관 그리고 SEC의 신임 의장도 폴 애킨스로 친암호화폐 인사로 꾸렸습니다. 이에 따라서 이 IRS 세무규정 철회를 시작으로 점점 암호화폐 산업의 친화적인 기조로 바뀌어가고 있는 만큼 예전에는 미국의 규제로 외국에서 법인을 차리거나 고용을 했었던 만큼 현재는 미국 내에서의 성장 가능성에 대한 기대감이 상승하고 있는 상황입니다. 자, 여기까지 브래드 갈링하우스의 인터뷰 1부에 대한 영상과 요약이었고요. 이번 영상이 유익하셨다면 구독과 좋아요, 알람 설정 부탁을 드리며 이제 2부 영상 또한 제가 내일 업로드가 될 예정이니 영상 시청 원하시면 꼭꼭꼭 구독 버튼 눌러주세요. 그럼 저는 내일 다시 찾아뵐 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 영상 시청 감사합니다.